Hello health lovers, so it's your Q student Nurse V, and today on the health episode we are going to be talking about the anatomy of the hindbrain and the spinal cord. Now the hindbrain is otherwise known as the Rubens-Servan node. So if you remember neurulation, you know the differentiations of the brain. So the hindbrain basically is the last part of the brain. So the hindbrain is located in between the midbrain and the spinal cord. That's to say, it connects the spinal cord to the brain. It's otherwise known as the brain stem. Now let's talk about the divisions of the hindbrain. The hindbrain is divided into three parts, or you say it has three major structures. Now we have the cerebellum, we have the pons, and we have the medulla oblongata. Now let's talk about the cerebellum. Now the anatomy of the cerebellum is quite equivalent to the anatomy of the cerebrum, but has a few differences. Now what is the cerebellum? Now the cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain, of the central nervous system. You know the first largest part of the brain is the cerebrum, that's the cerebral cortex. Now the second largest part of the brain is the cerebellum. Now the cerebellum is a size of a tennis ball. So imagine how a tennis ball is. That is how the cerebellum is. Now let's talk about the lateralization of the cerebellum, or you can say the divisions of the cerebellum. Now just like the cerebrum that was divided into two lateral hemispheres, now the cerebellum is divided into two lateral hemispheres by a feature called the vermis. Now you can see the difference. In the cerebrum it was a longitudinal feature, but in the cerebellum is the vermis. Now we have the left cerebellar hemisphere and we have the right cerebellar hemisphere. So we are going to talk about the layers of the cerebellum. Now just like the cerebellum is divided into two distinctive layers. We have the inner layer and we have the outer layer. Now the outer layer is composed of gray matter, and this gray matter makes the outer layer to be called the cerebellar cortex, just like the cerebrum that is called the cerebral cortex. Now this one is called the cerebral cortex. Now the inner layer is composed of white matter. Now this white matter looks like a tree. It has these tree-like structures and it's called the arbovatal. That is the tree of life. So take note, outer layer is the cerebellar cortex, gray matter, inner layer is the arbovatal, tree of life, and white matter. Now let's talk about the functions of the cerebellum. Now the cerebellum helps in maintaining balance. The ability for you to stand up and have stamina is because of your cerebellum. Now the cerebellum helps in maintaining posture, also helps in coordinating movement. Yeah, the ability for you to walk in a linear progress or linear way, that's straight without any distance, is because of what? The cerebellum. Now blood supply to the cerebellum, we have the cerebellar arteries and we have the dural sinuses in the brain. Now let's talk about the anatomy of the pons. Now the pons is a small bundle of neural tissue that is found in between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. So it is the first part of the what? The brain stem. It lies in between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. Now the length of the pons is about 3 cm long, approximately about 3 cm long, because it varies. Now the shape of the pons is oval in shape. It has a round shape. Now let's talk about the function of the pons. Now the pons also assist the medulla in breathing. It helps you to breathe. It helps and regulates breathing. So another function of the pons is that it connects the cerebrum to the cerebellum. That is, it acts as a link between the cerebellum and the cerebrum. Now it also connects the brain to the spinal cord. Now the pons also regulate dreams. It helps in dreams, sleep. So all those dreaming and you're sleeping, you're dreaming, and the rest, everything is being regulated by the pons. Now blood supply to the pons, we have the pontine arteries. So moving forward, let's talk about the anatomy of the last part of the hindbrain, which is the medulla oblongata. Now the medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the hindbrain and it continues as the spinal cord. Now the medulla oblongata is about 3 cm long and is situated in between the pons and the spinal cord. So it lies in the middle, in between them. Now let's talk about the functions of the medulla oblongata. Now the medulla oblongata primarily is responsible for breathing. It helps in breathing. It regulates breathing. Now it also helps in controlling blood pressure. It helps in reflex actions. What are these reflex actions? Let's take for instance, you touch a hot cup. Now the ability for you to quickly remove your hand and shake due to the heat, that is a reflex action. So this reflex action is being coordinated and regulated by the medulla oblongata. Now blood supply to the medulla oblongata is the anterior spinal arteries, because it's close to the spinal cord. So the anterior part of the spinal cord the arteries found there is also going to supply the medulla oblongata. So that is all for the hindbrain, and so far so good. We have talked about the anatomy of the forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. Okay guys, so let's talk about the anatomy of the spinal cord. So we are done talking about the anatomy of the brain, and remember that the central nervous system is divided into the brain and the spinal cord. So we are done with the anatomy of the brain. So over to the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is a long cylindrical part of the central nervous system that connects the brain to other parts of the body. So it connects the brain and enables the brain to communicate with the hands, with the legs, enables the brain to send signals and the rest. So it does act as a channel for the brain to speak to the body. Now, the location of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is located within the vertebral column. So that's the vertebrae. It's located inside the vertebrae. So the vertebral column is that bone that surrounds and protects the spinal cord. Now, it extends from the root or the base of the brainstem, that is the medulla, down to the level of the first lumbar and second lumbar vertebrae. Now, the length of the spinal cord is about 40 to 45 cm long, and it's also about 30 to 35 grams in weight. The color of the spinal cord is white in color, is whitish in color. Now let's talk about the protective layers of the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord is protected by a 3 membrane layers called the meninges. So these 3 layers comes together and they are collectively called the meninges. Now let's talk about the layers of the meninges. Now the meninges is divided into 3 distinctive layers. We have the dura mater, we have the arachnoid mater, and we have the pia mater. Now, talking about the dura mater is a very strong outer covering that protects the spinal cord. Now, it's separated by the spinal bone, that is the vertebral column, by a space. Now, this space that separates the dura mater and the vertebrae is called the epidural space. Now, this epidural space is a site for epidural anesthesia. Now, what is epidural anesthesia? That is given to pregnant women that don't really want to feel the pains of labor, so they could just go for epidural anesthesia and give birth very, very smooth without the pains of the contraction. Now we talk about the arachnoid mater. That is the second layer, that's the second membrane. So the arachnoid mater is a very thin, delicate membrane that lies beneath the dura mater. Now it is separated from the pia mater by the subarachnoid space. Now in this subarachnoid space, that is where the cerebrospinal fluid is found. Now let's talk about the pia mater. Now the pia mater is a very vascular matter, is the inner matter. And when you hear vascular has to do with blood supply. So obviously the pia mater is responsible for supplying blood to other parts of the spinal cord. Now let's talk about the external anatomy of the spinal cord. So the external anatomy of the spinal cord, it has 2 enlargements. Now we have the cervical enlargement and we have the lumbar enlargement. Now remember, it starts from the cervical down to the L1, L2. So the cervical enlargement is found in the cervical region, and it helps to supply nerves to the upper limbs, that's the up part of the body. Now we talk about the lumbar enlargement. Now the lumbar enlargement is found in the lumbar region and the sacral region. Most textbooks says the lumbosacral enlargement, so it's found in that region, and it supplies nerves to the lower limbs, that's the legs, the feet, etc. Now the terminal end of the spinal cord is called the conus medullaris. That ending part of the spinal cord is called the conus medullaris. So let's talk about the segments of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is divided into 31 segments. So we have 8 cervical, we have 12 thoracic, we have 5 lumbar, we have 5 sacral, and we have 1 pair of coccygeal. Now take it again. 8 from the cervical, we have 12 from the thoracic, we have 5 from the lumbar, we have 5 from the sacral, and we have 1 from the coccygeal. Now let's talk about the ramis of the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord is divided into 2 rami. So we have the ventral rami and we have the dorsal rami. If you go back to the relation, when we talk about the development of the spinal cord, we talked about the dorsal and the ventral horn. So that is otherwise known as the rami. Now the ventral rami is the anterior part of the spinal cord, and it takes motor impulses from the brain to the muscles, to the body, to the skin, etc. While the dorsal rami is the posterior part, and this dorsal rami conveys sensory information from the receptors, sensory information from, let's say, the pain receptors. For you to feel pain, it takes that pain from there and travels to the brain, so that the brain will interpret it and send a command as a motor output through the ventral rami. So that is the ramis of the spinal cord. Moving forward, that's all about the external anatomy of the spinal cord. So we want to talk about the internal anatomy of the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord is divided into three parts. We have the gray matter, we have the white matter, and we have the central canal. Now this gray matter is found in the middle part. It's found in the middle part of what the spinal cord, and it has butterfly shape. It's composed of neural cell bodies, dendrites, etc. So when you talk about the white matter surrounds the gray matter and is composed of myelinated nerve fibers. You know what myelin helps to do? It helps the nerve impulses to travel faster. Now the last internal structure of the spinal cord is the central canal. Now this central canal, as from the word central, so central hole, canal hole. So this central canal is found in the center of the spinal cord, and this is where the cerebrospinal fluid is located. Now let's talk about the ascending and descending tract of the spinal cord, or you can say the ascending and descending pathway. Now ascending goes up, right? Descending comes down. Take note of this illustration. Ascending goes up. What goes up? Sensory goes up. That is the receptors, the sensory organ, or the thing to go to the brain, because the brain is up. What goes down? The command from the brain goes down. Just have that in the back of your mind. So the ascending tract carries sensory impulses from the receptors. You know there are different types of receptors: pain receptors, touch receptors, vibration receptors, etc. So it carries sensory impulses from the receptors to the brain. That is going up, ascending. Now we have two types. We have the spinothalamic tract and we have the fasciculus gracilis. Now the spinothalamic tract carries pain, touch, vibration receptors, carries them to the brain, while the fasciculus gracilis carries mainly vibration and fine touch to where? The brain. Now we talk about the descending tract, coming down from the brain to where? The body, to the muscles, to the skin, to any part of the body. Now, after the sensory has gotten up and the brain has interpreted, it has to follow through a tract. A tract is a road, like a place that someone can pass or something can pass. So it has to pass through a tract to effect what the brain has commanded. So it passes through the descending tract. So this descending tract carries motor impulses, motor output from where? The brain down to where? The muscles, the skin, or to the body. Example of this is the corticospinal tract. Now this one controls the voluntary movement. Now blood supply to the spinal cord, we have the anterior and posterior spinal arteries. When we talk about the venous drainage, we have the spinal veins. Now what are the functions of this spinal cord? Now number one function is that it connects the brain to the body. It helps send sensory information to where? The brain. It receives motor information from the brain to the body. It helps to coordinate the activities of what? The body. So that is all for the anatomy of the spinal cord. So thank you very much for watching. So far so good. We are done with the anatomy of the central nervous system. So do well to like, share and follow. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about the anatomy of the peripheral system. Thank you very much, and do well to like, share and follow. Bye.